Today's sponsor is Blue Chew, and they're giving you your first shipment totally free. All you have to do is pay $5 for shipping. Go to bluechew.com, use promo code DAVID. I've put the link right underneath this video. If you want to see a tragic preview, really, of the voter suppression and catastrophic disenfranchisement that we're going to see in the November election, look no further than yesterday in Georgia. Georgia, among some other states, had primary elections yesterday. And you may or may not even have heard that elections were going on in local elections. Depending on what media sources you consume, you may not even have been aware that there were problems or that there were even elections yesterday, but there were. And this is it's really a crisis level situation where the United States looks much more like the developing countries that our right-wing leaders often criticize based on what our elections looked like yesterday. We had people waiting in lines hours and hours long outdoors in the heat, often wearing masks because we are still, by the way, dealing with the coronavirus pandemic. Of course, there were shortages of ballots, and this was all disproportionately in the minority precincts, parts of the state of Georgia where the population is majority minority, places that tend on average to vote more for Democrats than they tend to vote for Republicans. And at some point, I mean, how many times are we going to see the exact same story? And the answer is probably many, sadly, but we've been watching this for election cycle after election cycle. This happened back in Georgia, back in 2018 in Georgia. That was when then Secretary of State Brian Kemp, a Republican, was running for governor. And as Secretary of State, he oversaw his own election against Stacey Abrams to be governor of Georgia, ultimately won, big surprise, and widespread allegations of the exact same type of voter suppression, disenfranchisement, reduction of polling places in disproportionately minority and Democratic-leaning areas. It's the same game. And the reason that Republicans are going to aggressively push this in Georgia is that Georgia is increasingly a contested state. Now, I don't want to, pretend like it's a battleground state in any real sense right now. Presidentially, for now, it's still a state that Trump is likely going to win modestly easily. He's up in the polls about 7 points right now in Georgia. He'll almost certainly win. But the point is, Georgia in local and state elections is increasingly purple. It's close enough for Trump that he's going to have to spend some money there, which is money he can't spend in two places. He's going to spend it there instead of somewhere else. Back in 2016, Donald Trump only won Georgia by 5 percentage points. In the 2012 election, Mitt Romney had defeated Barack Obama by 8 in Georgia. And again, it's the state and local races are maybe suggestive of what we might see in the future in Georgia, which is more of a centrist lean than a hard right lean. And Republicans are understandably very worried. So we saw a preview yesterday in Georgia of what we're going to see in a ton of places in the fall. This includes Florida, Ohio, Wisconsin. Really, it's like every contested battleground state that was important to Trump in 2016 that he can't really afford to lose without putting his reelection at risk. We are going to see this exact same thing. Now, of course, lots of Georgia voters, you'll be glad to know, had no problem at all voting yesterday. It's voters who disproportionately vote in overwhelmingly white precincts. And they were widely reporting, listen, I showed up and voted in 5 minutes. There was no line. What are people complaining about? And that's exactly the strategy. Make it really easy for voters that are statistically more likely to vote Republican to vote. Make it much more difficult for voters that at the aggregate, broad mathematical level are more likely to vote for Democrats. And it's the same betrayal of Georgia voters once again. This is election rigging. We have to stop using these softer terms like there were reports of isolated irregularities. Come on. There were delays voting in some precincts. Those are essentially gaslighting terms. This is rigging because it's intentional, it's calculated, it's an effort to swing results by controlling and manipulating and sort of molding who gets to vote easily versus who's going to have trouble voting. So a few things have to happen. First, we need as many nonprofit groups as possible to be armed and ready to fight every voter suppression attempt. When they try to reduce polling places, cut early voting hours, put stricter guidelines for requesting an absentee ballot, purge voter rolls, as we've seen done in a number of different states, we need these nonprofit groups suing every single time and gumming up any of these attempts as much as possible. That's number one. Number two, anybody who can either vote early or vote absentee should plan to vote early and or vote absentee and should understand what the process looks like. Now, in some places, you will have access to both an absentee ballot, vote by mail, and early voting. You will have your choice of the two. In some places, it's one or the other, depending on the absentee ballot rules or the early voting rules. So inform yourself about what is going on where you vote. The absentee ballot you request from the state ahead of time. Some states are saying because of coronavirus, they'll send everybody an application for an absentee ballot. Others are looking at sending the ballots themselves. But the point is, the normal process is you request a ballot, you get it, you fill it out, you mail it in. That's it. You're done. Okay. Early voting is in-person voting. Depending on the state, sometimes about 3 weeks before the election day, in this case, November 3rd, early voting will start. It's usually limited locations. Like here in Boston, if I want to vote early, I can't vote in my neighborhood. I have to go to one of, I think it's like 5 or 6 locations, including City Hall, all the way downtown. Find out where that is. As many people as possible should take advantage of whichever method is available in their state and whatever is easier for you. Now, one last thing. The Georgia Secretary of State says there's going to be an investigation into what happened yesterday. Now, I really want you to understand how absurd this is. Brian Kemp was Secretary of State in November of 2018, and he ran the election in which he was a candidate for governor. And lo and behold, he won amidst allegations of voter suppression. Now, another Secretary of State is going to investigate voter suppression that he presided over to help his own party. It's a joke. We are a joke. I got a bunch of emails yesterday and today from European viewers saying, what's going on in the U.S. with your voting system? Like, how is this still a problem in one of the richest countries in the world? And the answer is, it's a problem by design. We could solve this, but there isn't a problem if you ask the people that benefit from this voter suppression. There are now calls. This is unbelievable. There are calls for the U.S. to bring in United Nations elections observers in November to try to ensure that there are fair elections in the United States. This is how unreliable and pathetic our election system is. And we're going to see a lot more of it as we get closer and closer to November. In a stunning new poll, Republican Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is losing to challenger Amy McGrath in his Kentucky Senate re-election race. Now, I'll give you the caveats in a moment, but the fact that this is even close is already a really big deal. It's typically not close at all in Kentucky for Mitch McConnell in his re-elections. There's a new poll from RMG Group, and it has Amy McGrath up 41-40. Amy McGrath, as you may know, is an Air Force veteran and challenging one of the longest sitting senators and the longest ever tenured senator out of Kentucky. Now, what's very, very interesting is that the poll is 41-40 in favor of Amy McGrath. It's within the margin of error, a statistical tie, certainly. When people participating in the poll are told Amy McGrath favors congressional term limits and Mitch McConnell opposes them, which is true, her support actually increases pretty dramatically, but there are a lot of undecided still in this poll, and there are certainly a fair number of people supporting someone other than Mitch McConnell or Amy McGrath. So when we typically talk about the Senate in 2020 and we think about what's the most likely path that Democrats could have to taking control of the Senate in 2020, we often go to Arizona, where Mark Kelly is very much ahead of Martha McSally, the incumbent Republican. We'll look at Cory Gardner, Republican incumbent in Colorado, who is well behind and may lose. We think about Susan Collins in Maine, Tom Tillis in North Carolina, maybe Steve Bullock in Montana. There's a few others. I'm not talking about all of them. But we don't usually talk about Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell has been one of the most effective Republican legislators in years. He's gotten a ton of right-wing judges confirmed. He successfully blocked Barack Obama's Supreme Court pick, Merrick Garland, holding that seat open for a year until Donald Trump was inaugurated and ultimately selected Neil Gorsuch. That is horrifying, horrifying. But if you are a Republican, that's a major accomplishment. I mean, that should have been Barack Obama's selection. And Mitch McConnell was able to hold it for Donald Trump. Disgusting. But if you're on their side, you love it. It would be incredible to remove Mitch McConnell. And he's currently down one. Now, let me give you the caveat. Mitch McConnell is down one, but it's 41-40. So statistically, it's a tie. And the challenger at some point is going to need to get to 50% or close to it. Amy McGrath is at 41. If she can't start getting to 45, 48, closer to 50, typically in these elections, the undecideds and the third party holdouts, as we get closer to Election Day, are going to break for the incumbent. In this case, it's Mitch McConnell. So Amy McGrath's ceiling could be the 41 that she has right now, which is not going to be enough to win it. But it's a fight. It's a fight. Anti-McConnell Kentuckians should get involved in this race. It would be a race, if you're in a state that doesn't have a hotly contested Senate seat, you could get involved in phone banking and fundraising for Amy McGrath. McConnell has been in the U.S. Senate longer than any other senator from Kentucky has ever been. Mitch McConnell went to the Senate in 1985. The year after I was born, Mitch McConnell went to the Senate, and Mitch McConnell is still in the Senate. It's too much. It's too much. He's got to go. He's been a Senate Majority Leader for 5 years since 2015, and he has left a massive destruction in his wake. And if indeed Mitch McConnell loses, it would be a huge bellwether for how the entire Senate is going. Now, usually when we do analyses, we say, here's how this one race is going. Here's how this other race is going. The reality is that these things come in waves. If the incumbent from 1985, Republican Majority Leader, is knocked out in Kentucky, a lot of these other races are likely to go in the direction of Democrats. And we will probably, if that happens, have Donald Trump to thank. Seats and states that are rarely, if ever, in play for Democrats are now a fight. Even forcing Republicans to have to spend money to defend them is a victory, because these are often very easy to win states and races for Republicans. So pick a race. If it's in your state, great. If you're in a state without a close election, find something nearby or something you're interested in. There is plenty to be done. And this being Kentucky, I'm thinking about getting a nice bottle of Kentucky bourbon to have for election night coverage. And if Mitch McConnell loses on November 3rd, maybe we'll open that up, even though it will be a very big uphill battle. But by the way, the warning is, because this polling is close, this piggybacks on the earlier story about the suppression we saw yesterday in Georgia. Because this election is close, we should expect that Kentucky Republicans are going to go extra hard on the voter suppression and the other types of election fraud tactics. So we will likely need extra margin if Amy McGrath is to defeat Mitch McConnell. It's been happening this week in Georgia and elsewhere, massive poll closures, creating very large waits in disproportionately Democratic areas. We know the tactics, but we've got to fight them, okay? Next week, Tuesday night, 8 p.m. Eastern, we will be having the second David Pakman Show chess tournament. This is free to all. This is not members only. There's no fee. This is just free. It's just building sportsmanship and camaraderie in a difficult time. So that'll be Tuesday, June 16th at 8 p.m. Eastern. The tournament will be on leechess.org. I'll have more info about that, but put it in your calendar. I hope you'll play. We had 500 players last time, and I hope we do better than that. In the meantime, make sure to let me know what you think about this McConnell race on Twitter. I am DPakman on Twitter.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
This episode was sponsored by Blue Chew, giving my viewers their first shipment totally free when you go to bluechew.com and use promo code DAVID. It's just a reality that many men, regardless of age, can sometimes benefit from a boost in confidence, a little bit of performance help. Blue Chew is the first chewable tablet with the same FDA-approved ingredients as Viagra and Cialis. Blue Chew being a chewable tablet means it starts working twice as fast as a pill. It's prescribed online. You spend a couple minutes with a short questionnaire. A licensed doctor reviews the information, decides if a prescription is right for you. It's then shipped directly to your home in discreet packaging, no awkward visits to the doctor's office or pharmacy. Plus, it's also cheaper than getting it at a pharmacy. When you go to bluechew.com and use promo code DAVID, you will get your first shipment completely free. Just pay $5 shipping. That's promo code DAVID to get your first shipment of Blue Chew completely free. And I've put the link right underneath this video.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new members of the day are Sean Webeke and David Perret. Thanks to Sean and David for your support. Really appreciate it, as well as the folks that have signed up and just stuck around for a while. And one of those people is James Atkins, who is today's longtime sustaining member of the day. Grab a membership, get the commercial-free audio and video feeds of the show every day. Sign up at joinpakman.com. If you would like a discount, not a little discount, a big discount, you can use the coupon code 2020 now. That saves you 66%. Just a massive, massive discount, which is optional. And everybody, regardless of coupon codes, will get a thank you from me at some point. Okay, let's get to Hatriot Mail. If you don't remember what Hatriot Mail is, it has been a couple weeks since we had our last one. Here's a quick reminder.
We're getting to the oranges of this investigation. So God bless United States of America. Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
All right, here is this week's Hatriot Mail, as usual, needing no introduction.
Have you ever don't discuss politics? Very wise advice from Mr. David Pakman. Don't stir the pot with your conspira thoughts. I'm David Pakman. I worry so much about what people think about me that I suffocate myself with a mask. I'm a beta snowflake sheep. It's a shame what your show has become, mate.
Yeah, I mean, I'm having trouble parsing the grammar a little bit there, but this is a political show, so we do discuss politics. Have you ever don't discuss politics, maybe interpreted most charitably means, do we talk about other things on the show? And certainly we do, but it is primarily a political program. By the way, speaking of discussing politics, in the last couple of months, it seems that because of coronavirus, now with the protests, with what is essentially a referendum on Donald Trump coming up in November, more and more people have been writing to me saying, I feel compelled to talk about politics with my family, even though I don't usually, coworkers, even though I don't usually, my significant other's parents, even though I don't usually. Do you think that there should be this taboo around talking about politics and religion, where in many other countries it is much more normal to do that? And I'm going to address that in detail on the Friday show. Anybody who knows how I grew up, which is politics is a central piece of what is discussed at family gatherings, at the dinner table, etc., I believe that we need to destigmatize, remove the taboo from talking about politics, especially because if we don't talk about, I'm kind of going off on a tangent from the voicemail caller, but from the Hatriot Mail here. But if we don't talk about politics and model that people can have disagreements and then everything is still okay, and then you just finish your dinner and then you play a video game or watch a TV show and everybody can still get along, if we don't model that by taking off the stigma of discussion of politics and religion, then the model people will have is the way politics is discussed on social media, which is toxic trash. So I am very much in favor of making political and religious discussions just mainstream among coworkers, family, etc. In the meantime, if you want to fight hatriotism, you can use the coupon code HATRIOT40 to save 40% off of your membership of choice at joinpakman.com. One of the stories that stands out in terms of police brutality from the last week or 10 days of protests is the video of 75-year-old Martin Gugino being shoved onto the ground by two Buffalo police officers, Buffalo, New York, hitting his head so hard that he actually started bleeding from his right ear, seemingly knocked unconscious when it happened. The two officers involved in that incident have been charged with second-degree assault after they were filmed knocking Gugino over. These two officers are 39-year-old Aaron Tergalski and 32-year-old Robert McCabe. They've both pleaded not guilty, and they've both been suspended without pay. And this incident led to the resignations of dozens of Buffalo police officers. No, not because they are protesting what these two officers did, because they are defending what the two officers did in shoving Martin Gugino. And now Donald Trump is actually attacking, wait for it, the 75-year-old guy who was put into critical condition by the officers. The Daily Beast reports that as of Monday afternoon, Gugino had been upgraded from critical to serious but stable. And Donald Trump yesterday spread a completely baseless conspiracy theory that Gugino was some part of Antifa setup of the police officers, a planned provocation of some kind. This is something that's been alleged by Donald Trump's latest favorite propaganda outlet, OAN. Donald Trump tweeting yesterday, quote, "Buffalo protester shoved by police could be an Antifa provocateur. 75-year-old Martin Gugino was pushed away after appearing to scan police communications in order to black out their equipment. OAN, I watched. He fell harder than was pushed, was aiming scanner. Could be a setup." Now, a lot of the debate is over whether this could be true rather than the insanity of Donald Trump, the president, even tweeting something like this. But just to do our thorough due diligence, here's the story Trump is referring to from OAN. Take a look and you'll be able to tell that Trump is just completely uncritically falling for obvious agitprop style propaganda. Take a look.
New reports find a protester pushed by Buffalo police was appearing to use common Antifa tactics. One America's Christian Rose looks into the matter.
And I think cops are bad. He's looking to get punched in the face. Say stuff, that's what it is. Get fired and lose their pension.
A new report finds the latest tensions at the Buffalo Police Department could be a result of a false flag provocation by far-left group Antifa.
So I'm cutting the video there because we'll be demonetized if we show the actual footage of Gugino being knocked down. But you get the idea of the story on OAN. So I need you to understand that this is a completely baseless conspiracy. It was even suggested that Gugino, again, came equipped with some kind of fake blood dispenser, and that what appears to be Gugino bleeding from his ear is actually not. Imagine how absurd this is. He was an Antifa plant who tricked police into pushing him so he could slam his own head into the pavement and put himself in the hospital for a week. What a big win for the protesters, right? Now, in contrast, Donald Trump is attacking an elderly man who was assaulted by police, and yet he has said nothing about the KKK member who drove into a crowd of protesters a few days ago. Now, you might hear me say that, and you might be wondering, KKK, what are you talking about, David? I didn't hear about that. And that's exactly part of the problem. You might not even have heard of this story, but in Hanover, Virginia, 36-year-old Harry Rogers was arrested after he drove his truck into a crowd of protesters, and it has now been admitted that he is a known leader of the Ku Klux Klan and a disseminator of what is considered or called a Confederate ideology. Trump has said nothing about that, but is defending police in one of the most brutal anecdotes of these protesters while suggesting that the victim, a 75-year-old peace activist, might be an Antifa plant equipped with surreptitious police monitoring technology. So what I would like to see Republicans come out and say is not whether they believe Trump's conspiracy theory, the OAN conspiracy theory. I would like them to come out and say that merely getting involved in this type of thing is an absolute atrocity for a president to do, because a lot of the debate, sadly, is about whether Martin Gugino might be a provocateur, whether Martin Gugino might have brought a fake blood device of some kind. The real issue is that the president is even involved in this absolute gutter trash. And the effect of all of this is that it just continues to divide the country. If Trump can divide the country about such an obvious, clear-cut case of police brutality by sowing doubt and uncertainty, by amplifying a story from OAN, he is preventing people from coming together about anything. Like, if people can't come together about this incident, then the country can be divided about almost anything. And we have to remind ourselves that this is the president of the United States who is saying these things and participating in this stuff. This is what we would normally expect to see people like Alex Jones tweeting about, and it's the president who's tweeting about it. How does he have millions, tens of millions of supporters still? And at a certain point, you know, I did this segment a couple, maybe a year, a little more ago, called "We Have to Accept That There's a Lot of Stupid People." And the segment clearly resonated and did very, very well, although some people took offense to it. We have to understand that this says something really horrifying about our country, that Donald Trump can be saying these things and doing these things and maintaining the support of tens of millions of people despite tweeting such obvious agit trash, as I like to call it. We're going to continue following this on the David Pakman Show Instagram page, which is David Pakman Show on Instagram. Also, follow me on Instagram at david.pakman. I think tomorrow or the next day, we're going to have a video of me harvesting my one strawberry from my garden and a single leaf of mint and eating it, preparing it in a gourmet fashion. That's on my personal Instagram, david.pakman. Follow the show on Instagram for more on this story at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show depends on your support, and the easiest way is through membership, which includes the world-famous bonus show, as well as commercial-free audio and video streams of the show just for members. Sign up today at joinpakman.com. Coupon code saves you 40%. Vote soon 18.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to welcome to the program today Adrian Barden, who's professor of philosophy at Wake Forest University and also author of the book The Truth About Denial, Bias and Self-Deception in Science, Politics, and Religion. It's really great to have you on. I appreciate it.
Hey, David, thanks for having me.
So to start with, denialism. How far back does denialism go as far as we know? I mean, were there early denialists when there were original theories about what are humans and what is outer space and is weather God or simply the machinations of climate? Or I mean, like, how far back does denialism go in some way, shape, or form?
Well, yes, all of the above. I would send it back several million years, as a matter of fact. So Homo sapiens evolved in small groups. And going back further to our ancestors, they were in the same situation. And it's a really important adaptive trait if you're living in a small group to be able to integrate yourself into the group's ideological worldview. You know, if your group worships Poseidon, you better figure out a way to believe in Poseidon. Otherwise, you're out, for example, right? So it's really deep in our evolutionary history that we have formed this talent for rationalizing beliefs in order to integrate with a larger worldview. So yes, and so then that moves forward through history. All kinds of religious beliefs. Obviously, that's probably the beginning of it all. Beliefs about other groups, because what our evolutionary context was, we evolved in small groups that were in competition with other groups. So if we hate the group, if our group hates the group across the river, I'm going to find reasons to hate that group too. Otherwise, I'm not able to integrate myself into my own group, because we don't survive well on our own. Cooperation, social cooperation, that's our evolutionary niche. That's what gives us our advantage.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So early on, there was an evolutionarily advantageous reason why we were able to sort of potentially suppress contradictory information in order to be in line with our group. Does that still hold true today in the same way? I mean, is it an issue of evolutionary advantage at this point?
Well, a lot of things that in the past were an advantage aren't necessarily an advantage now, but it's still there. It's
right.
still deep in our cognitive makeup that we have these skills. We're actually very, very good at adapting our beliefs, not just our behavior, but our beliefs to our situation. And you mentioned, ignoring evidence or, picking out the evidence that you want, rationalizing, and what's called confirmation bias. right? You ignore the evidence you don't want, and you seek out, evidence or reasons to believe what you want to believe anyway. And that becomes actually particularly toxic in our current media environment, where you can go wherever you want to get the worldview that you want to believe, and you get the picture of the world presented to you in HD video, and described to you the way you want to hear it. And and so we have what's called these media bubbles that people get into, in addition to things like our geographic sorting here in the United States in particular. People have sorted themselves very well geographically into like-minded communities.
Is there any demographic trends that you see in terms of denialism and sort of rejection of confirmatory evidence? Maybe like in terms of age, is there a certain age at which this becomes more prevalent? And if so, is that an education or a cultural thing, or anything demographically that you've observed?
Well, you'll hear different theories from different social scientists about this. Younger people have demonstrated a little more cognitive flexibility and openness. Older folks are, as you would say, are more set in their ways. They're also a little more sensitive to threat. They feel more threatened, and that's a really big factor here. If we also look at the progressive/liberal versus conservative ways of thinking about the world. So where conservatives obviously skew at this point in the U.S. Whiter and older, obviously. Conservatives, by definition, are what we call system justifiers. They are pro-status quo. Conservatives are comfortable with the way things are in terms of the social and economic order and its hierarchies. And they will seek out reasons to dismiss evidence that there's something wrong with that order, such as systemic inequality. And younger people are less prone to do that.
So it seems like there's an asymmetry there, in the sense that when you talk about the status quo and you think about inertia, certainly it takes less energy to maintain the status quo in general, all else being equal, than it would to change the status quo. And so there is a sort of, it seems that there would be a structural advantage to those who are predisposed to keep things the same, because it's easier to do so in a sense.
Well, the status quo is upheld by all kinds of systems. For example, the police. The police are in any society, the police are the tip of the spear when it comes to maintaining the social and economic hierarchy. That's when we say law and order, that's what the order part of that means. When Trump calls himself Nixon calls himself the law and order president, and Trump calls himself the law and order president. That's what the order is. The order is maintaining the current social and economic hierarchy. And that includes, obviously, systems of systemic racial bias and systemic structural economic inequality.
I'm interested in climate change in this context, because we could think about a way in which denying climate change goes against the known facts, and may be advantageous if you're part of certain political groups, right? So in order to keep the peace, as you suggest, we may have this tendency to say, hey, even if there's information that suggests climate change is real and it's man-made, I'm going to stick with my group. But over the long term, if it's true what science says about the climate, it's self-destructive to the human race and to the planet. So it seems that there is a long-term disadvantage when it comes to the sort of evolutionary aspect of it. How should we interpret climate change denial in this context?
David, I'm very interested in climate change denial, so I'm glad you bring it up. The first thing I'd want to stress is that being a climate science denialist has nothing to do with being stupid or being uneducated. In fact, what we see is the reverse. If you're a conservative, you're more likely to be a climate science denier if you have college education. you're more likely, when you give people tests, not just on science literacy, but climate science literacy, you're more likely to be a denier. If you're conservative, that when you score higher on a climate science literacy test. So what is that telling us? That telling us is that we are really good at rationalizing our own beliefs. The more information we have, the more ammunition we get to rationalize those beliefs. This puts us in a classic game theoretical situation. I don't know if I want to get too technical on this, but yeah, where individual decisions about what's best for them in terms of what belief systems they want to hold on to become collectively absolutely disastrous in the long run.
So that's interesting. So in other words, the more information we have, maybe, not the more that our beliefs align with what we would call an empirical reality, but the better we are at justifying the beliefs that we have.
Well, we have more capacity to rationalize. It doesn't mean we have to, but there is definitely a tendency to do so. I mean, we love to think of ourselves as these purely rational beings, and all our beliefs are based on evidence and listening to qualified experts. But in practice, that's not what happens when it's beliefs, when we're presented with facts that are threatening to us. So our very sense of identity is based on the groups that we feel associated with. Like if I said to you, David, tell me about yourself, right? I'm going to make up some things about you, right? I say, hey, David, tell me about yourself. Who are you? And you'd say, well, look, I was born in Rhode Island, but I grew up in Texas. My parents immigrated from Ireland. I'm a Methodist. I'm a social conservative, but I feel strongly about the environment. And all of those facts that when you tell me all about yourself, all of those things are relations you have to other groups, and in terms of their ideological worldview. That's your identity. So when you're presented with facts that challenge the worldviews of the groups that you associated with, it feels like a personal attack. You have an emotional response, and our brains are totally set up to defend themselves. And we defend ourselves by through rationalization, confirmation bias, what we call motivated reasoning. You have a conclusion in mind. There's no such thing as climate change, and then you seek out reasons to believe that, and you discount the reasons you're given to believe that there is climate change, right? And once again, in our media environment, you can always find what you're looking for when you're looking for reasons to rationalize your own belief system.
So that gets me to sort of the last major thing I want to touch on, which is we've now widely read and researched and discovered that just giving people more facts and data is not very effective at changing minds. In fact, it can do the opposite. As you say, people can see that as a threat and further kind of plant their feet in where they are. Right. What are the more effective ways to get people to reconsider their beliefs? And to throw out just a couple of things, the one debate that I've had with some people, and Nathan J. Robinson, when I spoke to him, he felt very strongly that appealing to people on the basis of their values and tying that to the conclusion you want is not a good idea. So, for example, like appealing to fiscal conservatives to end the death penalty on the cost issue, when in reality that may not be the primary reason I might want to end the death penalty. There's debate over whether that's a good idea or a bad idea. Ballpark for us the best strategies for effectively getting people to change their beliefs.
I agree with that. There's a lot of talk about message framing, basically marketing your message to your audience, frame it in their values, in terms of their values. Hey, you're a conservative. Let's talk about conserving the environment, right? You're an evangelical. Let's talk about caring for God's creation. Maybe over the very long term with a lot of interactions, and if you put that all in the right context for a long period of time, that could change people's minds. A few interactions along those lines, it's like what was that old king who took his sword and tried to stop the waves from coming in, right?
Right.
People have this lifetime of cultural identifications and identity that are just going to blow that kind of intervention out of the water. I would say rather appeal to local issues that are of local interest, right? Talk about, I was just reading about Miami and the fact that there's saltwater intrusion into the freshwater supply. Now, everyone in Southeast Florida, no matter what political persuasion you are, really cares about having drinking water and not having flooding, right? So don't talk about climate change. Don't talk about the evidence for climate change. Just say, okay, we've got a seawater problem in our freshwater supply. What do we do about that? I would start there. You talk about, in the American West, talk about drought in an agricultural community, right? I would start there. I'm afraid that doesn't take you all the way to the kind of global systemic change that we really need. But that's the beginning. There's things you could do in K through 12 education with regard to science education that I think would be much better. Instead of teaching people science facts, we should be teaching kids scientific method, really focusing on that, about curiosity, about debunking claims that are not well founded, and educate kids that way. But that's a generational thing. The thing about climate change is that we don't really have time for that. So it's an urgent crisis, and I don't have this sort of magic bullet in terms of a message where we can send out this message.
Yeah.
And we're going to convert everybody, including those people who are invested in the status quo so heavily that they're going to discount that evidence automatically. It's tough.
But certainly I agree that at a systemic level, starting with media literacy and critical thinking far earlier as well, we are kind of, it's a long game, but we are sort of better setting up society to think in that way. The book is The Truth About Denial, Bias and Self-Deception in Science, Politics, and Religion. We've been speaking with the book's author, Adrian Barton, who's professor of philosophy at Wake Forest University. Really appreciate your time today.
Thanks so much, David.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show depends on the support of our viewers and listeners, and one way to keep us going is through Patreon, where you can pledge as little as $1 per month or as much as you want at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Great perks and benefits as well. Read about them.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Donald Trump's press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany, was asked at her Monday press briefing by reporters whether Donald Trump plans to resume the coronavirus press briefings, and she didn't answer the question, but the answer is obviously no, and it's a good question to ask because we're seeing massive coronavirus hotspots growing very rapidly in the United States, mostly different areas than the early hotspots, and I'm going to talk about the virus itself shortly. But there's a real media story here to understand. We talk about the bully pulpit of corporate media. Much of what is in the national discussion, the top 3 stories that are in the national discussion at any given time, are essentially led by corporate media. And this is called agenda setting power. It's not necessarily that corporate media tells us what to think about any particular issue, although sometimes they do. But it's that corporate media tells us what to think about, what to talk about. And I'll give you an example. Remember Kids in Cages, the immigration scandal? It's still going on, but it's rarely, if ever, in the media, except to mention that some people being held at the border have contracted coronavirus. But nothing has fundamentally changed about that story, which was wall-to-wall coverage previously during this administration. Now it's like it doesn't exist. Then it was coronavirus. We have a pandemic, daily press briefings, including Donald Trump and Drs. Fauci and Birx, daily updates down to the specific details about the number of masks and Project Airbridge flights from Mike Pence. And then the White House signaled we're going to stop. Trump wondered aloud about injecting bleach and isopropyl alcohol to treat coronavirus. It became clear that the White House didn't really want more visibility for Drs. Birx and Fauci talking about the virus. So the briefing stopped. And with that, over time, as more and more states have decided to reopen, some are safely reopening, some are very unsafely reopening, the topic of the virus itself started to take a backseat, especially as the George Floyd killing took place and the massive protests started. And now, as we're seeing, the protests are starting to die down a little bit, But the big topic has become defund the police or do not defund the police, depending on whose perspective you're listening to. Right-wing media saying defunding the police would be anarchy. Some on the left furious that Biden does not want to defund the police, but understand that nothing materially has changed with coronavirus. We'll look at the data, put it up on the screen. Now, fortunately, as you can see, we've seen a leveling off and a slow decline in the number of cases at the national level. But mostly what we're seeing is the cases being relocated, where we are finding new hotspots. Understand that at the peak, we were finding 25 to 30,000 cases a day. We are still finding 19 to 25,000 new cases every single day. And the number of active cases, meaning people who currently have the virus, is still as high as it's ever been. And yet Donald Trump barely talks about coronavirus. His press secretary barely talks about coronavirus. Right-wing media is done with it, other than calling it a scam or a conspiracy. And even corporate media is increasingly talking about coronavirus less and less. But we have a new Politico article that points out not only is the pandemic still very much a pandemic with no effective treatment, no vaccine, we have new hotspots that are setting records for new cases. There are parts of the country that are exploding with virus cases, and Donald Trump is just silent. Another massive failure, because Trump, by not talking about it, makes people think the threat is over, meaning they go out and behave irresponsibly and cause even more cases. And in fact, as we talked about yesterday on the bonus show, Donald Trump is planning to restart his huge MAGA rallies as part of his 2020 reelection campaign in a couple of weeks. So I'll give you some really specific examples. Texas, which started to reopen pretty quickly, is exploding. Week to week, they have more and more cases. The number of active cases in Texas is higher today than it has ever been. Florida, run by Republican Governor Ron DeSantis, also started to open pretty early. They were caught lying about numbers, as we previously covered. And after a small dip sometime in April, which might have just been them lying, they once again in Florida are seeing record numbers of new cases. Now, I mentioned that the cases are dramatically shifting from some parts of the country to others. This doesn't mean, things aren't going terribly everywhere. I am thrilled to say that here in Massachusetts, at least for now, cases have been very steadily declining since late April. The graph I'm showing you, you'll see a one-day spike about a week ago. That's not really a spike. That was a bunch of presumptive cases from the 3 months of coronavirus were all added in on that day. But we are looking really good here, and I'm thrilled to see that. So this is a story not just about the virus itself, which is still raging with no treatment or vaccine, but it's a media story as well about the agenda-setting power that corporate media has. We said 7 weeks ago, Trump's strategy is going to be just start pretending it doesn't exist, start talking about the economy, jobs, reopening, and a bunch of corporate media has played along. Now, in the meantime, things are so bad here in the United States with coronavirus that as more and more countries are reopening travel, the United States is being banned. I'll give you an example. Iceland has so dominated the virus that Iceland decided that on, I believe it's June 15th, they're going to reopen tourism. When you get to Iceland, you have to have a COVID test at the airport or quarantine for 14 days. People are going to be able to go to Iceland and start doing tourism if that's what they want to do, except Americans aren't going to be allowed because things are so out of control here. Other countries, people are going to be allowed to start going to Iceland, not Americans, because it's a disaster. And I wouldn't be surprised if this continues. As the virus keeps spreading in different U.S. states, other countries are going to be increasingly controlling it. Not Brazil, India, there's places that Russia that aren't controlling it, but more and more countries are going to be allowed to restart travel. And Americans are going to be banned from going to other countries because it is so poorly handled here. Now, as far as the framing and the propaganda, expect Trump soon to start arguing that Antifa and other left-wing protesters are responsible for spreading the virus. If the numbers keep growing in a lot of these new hotspots like Florida and Texas, I would anticipate that Donald Trump will take the protests as the perfect opportunity to say it's Antifa and lefties that are now responsible, if he even mentions it at all. And to be clear, The protests will cause some number of new cases. What we're seeing now is reflective of the situation 10 to 14 days ago. And that's important to remember. Be ready for it because it's going to happen. And don't forget, we're still in the middle of a pandemic, which some doctors believe is still in its beginning phases, which is overwhelming to think about. So you have to see this video to believe it. Sean Hannity from Fox News is promoting a pepper spray and tear gas gun on his live nightly television program. Here in the United States, if you don't know, we have a propaganda news channel called Fox News. And with some rare exceptions, Fox News basically carries water for Republicans and significantly carries water for Donald Trump. Yesterday, Sean Hannity promoted a projectile gun powered by CO2 cartridges, which shoots balls of pepper spray and tear gas. Now, this is considered a chemical weapon that is banned in international warfare. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Check out the video from Sean Hannity's program.
Lethal methods that the police could do. Take a look at your screen. Look at that. By the way, no financial interest in burn a gun, but I purchased a number of them. Yes, full price I paid. Now, I met with them, and I purchased a number of their items. Now, again, this is an alternative. It won't kill people. Non-lethal defense. Non-lethal. It shoots small projectiles filled with pepper spray and tear gas. And by the way, unlike these stun guns, which have an incredibly short range and those stupid wires, this weapon's accurate up to 50 feet. Why? Because I own one. And they even come equipped with lasers, so you can't really miss for accuracy. Now, we didn't show the video I wanted to. We'll get it up later in the show where it actually will play for you what happens when somebody gets hit with it. They don't die. And it could hopefully be an alternative in a very volatile, dangerous situation, whatever new technology we can develop. Now, according to reports,
I like how Hannity clarifies that he doesn't have an investment in the manufacturer, Byrna, which would be the natural thing we would imagine because it sounds and looks like an infomercial happening in the middle of his program. It sort of sounds like the context is he's trying to propose ways that police could deal with protesters to avoid hurting them, or maybe for police to deal with encounters like the George Floyd encounter. So I played this for you for two different reasons. First, the visual of it is crazy. It looks like an infomercial. Hannity is promoting specific weapons on his program, which is a wild thing for news programs to be doing. He's also spreading misinformation. Hannity's promoting this like it's a paintball gun, which, by the way, if you get hit in the eye with a paintball gun, it can still do damage. But if you get hit in the eye with a pepper spray or tear gas ball, you could not only lose the eye, there can be very serious reactions to pepper spray and tear gas. Even on the basic facts, Sean Hannity is acting like this is like a harmless tool when it is not at all harmless. There are international case reports of tear gas causing death through eventual respiratory failure, and there's other just horrifying examples. And in the context of coronavirus, one of the things you're not supposed to do is touch your eyes, and you want to try to avoid coughing and sneezing on other people. When you deploy tear gas and pepper spray in large crowds, people immediately start rubbing their eyes, coughing, sneezing onto the people next to them. So this is a bad idea in general. It's a particularly bad idea now with coronavirus. And in studies done on members of the military, where very often they will be exposed to tear gas as part of their training, it increases your risk of contracting the flu, pneumonia, bronchitis, and other respiratory illnesses. So this is not without consequence, as Hannity is trying to argue. Next, tear gas is considered a chemical weapon, and it's banned in war dating back to 1993. Now, you might say, okay, it might be banned internationally, but the United States isn't part of that. Yes, it is. The United States ratified the ban on these tools, weapons, in 1997. But domestically, tear gas, instead of being considered a banned chemical weapon, is considered an approved riot control agent, and it's permitted for law enforcement use. It is actually so common in the United States that people may not realize tear gas is banned in international warfare, and we have American law enforcement using it for crowd control and compliance during domestic protests, which are protected by the First Amendment, banned on the battlefield, used regularly in American cities. So that's layer one and layer two. Now the deeper issue here. Hannity, like many people on the right, comes at all of these issues with the attitude of what gun or weapon or aggressive tactic could we introduce into a situation that's already volatile. That's how they approach these issues. They never go to how could we de-escalate a situation to prevent officers from even needing or believing that they need tear gas guns to begin with. This is the problem. And when police bring out tear gas into a chaotic situation, it creates more chaos and the protests become more chaotic and it leads to even harsher reactions from police. This is a completely optional, self-reinforcing feedback loop. The de-escalation tactics like, transparent communication, empathy, negotiation, we've seen examples of all of this stuff. That's how you stop the cycle of escalation. Instead, Sean Hannity is talking about here's a tear gas gun you could use. And apparently it's within law enforcement big picture to understand that the priority should, rather than being better armed with riot shields and nightsticks, should be de-escalation tactics. And this is a big part of the police reform that I've been outlining over the last few days on the show. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's a pretty straightforward question, and I have a pretty straightforward answer from one of our voicemail callers. Take a listen.
Hello, David. Big fan of the show. If you remember me, I'm from the 419 area code. Live in Northwest Ohio, rural community. Anyway,
right.
My question was, how much stupidity or just blatant disregard for the truth can Republicans take?
A lot.
In my opinion, this election is going to come down to how well Trump can BS the public, and I think he could do that rather well. But I live around with many Republicans. I don't understand how they can believe everything. They've been brainwashed, and it's sad to look at. So
there's a lot of things that are different that are going on. You have a contingent of people who support Trump because they are cognitively limited. They're ignorant. They're ignorant to what's going on and they lack critical thinking skills. So they just fall for stuff. That's one component. Number two, there are people on the right who are going to vote for Trump's reelection merely to own the libs, as they like to say. They refuse to consider voting for a Democrat, despite the fact that Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden have been very centrist Democrats in a lot of ways. And on principle, in order to, attack or win against liberals, they just are going to vote for Donald Trump's reelection. That's another contingent. You've got a third contingent that is people that recognize the dishonesty and the lies, but they see recognizing this by voting for someone else as kind of like admitting that they failed, that they got tricked in 2016. So there's like a cognitive dissonance that's going on where a lot of voters can't abandon Trump because of what it would say about them, right? And so that's another component. And then there is another contingent that actually benefits from Trump's policy. They're able to, run businesses extra profitably as the regulatory apparatus of the United States looks away under Trump or whatever, right? They have some personal stake and they say, to hell with everybody else. So there's not one answer, and there is stupidity. There is tolerance of lies, but there's a lot more to it than just that. But a very, very good question and well said. I hope that you will join the second David Pakman Show chess tournament. It's going to be Tuesday, June 18th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. It's open to everybody, all skill levels. It'll be on lichess.org. That's lichess.org. You can register now, and then I'll be streaming my participation in the chess tournament. We had 500 players in the first one. I hope we do better than that this time around. We also have a great bonus show coming up for you today. We will talk about the burning of a police precinct and the degree of approval among the American public for it. I'll preview for you that it's quite low. Number two, the program Cops has been canceled in the wake of what is going on with George Floyd. And number three, the dictionary Merriam-Webster will be updating its definition of racism in light of what is going on. All of these stories and more on today's bonus show. 2 ways to access it. Become a member at joinpakman.com or become a patron at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. I'll see you then. Thanks so much for watching today's episode. Just a reminder, today's sponsor, Blue Chew, is giving you your first shipment completely free. All you have to do is pay $5 shipping. Go to bluechew.com and use the promo code DAVID. I've put a link right underneath this video.